Hello, and welcome to this ACM webinar on best practices for remote meetings. This is Mike Wassenaar, your host for today's webinar. ACM webinars are typically a benefit of membership in ACM, but we've made today's available for free to the public because of the urgency of the subject matter, remote meetings. That said, you can get a list of upcoming webinars on the ACM website, and members can view recordings of presentations in the past on our website at allcommunitymedia.org. On today's call, we'll talk about best practices for remote meetings. We and other people across the country have been compiling best practices and suggestions from PEG channels across the country over the last few weeks during the COVID crisis about everything from technical setups and hosting meetings to training government and local officials and how to use these tools to ensure that open meetings take place in safe conditions during the COVID-19 outbreak. We want to share that collective wisdom with you so you can support local government and other organizations in the weeks to come during that crisis. On today's call, we'll be joined by Ann Tice, Andrew Doig, and Kathy Bisbee from Brookline Interactive Group, Seth Ring from Metro East Community Media, and Adam McCune from Goffstown TV. Now, because of the number of people on this webinar, questions will have to occur on the Zoom chat bar, which is at the bottom of your screen. Please send us your questions as the presentations are being made, and we'll get to them at the end of the call. Before we begin, go to our guests and let me introduce them. I'd like to actually go to a poll to find out a little bit more about your own experiences with remote meetings so that we can better understand what questions you'd like us to answer. So I'm going to launch a poll, which is a function of Zoom that allows us to be able to get information from guests who are joining the meeting. So currently, we want to find out if you're live streaming public meetings. That's question one. It's a yes or no question. We want to know what is your preferred remote meeting platform if you're using one. So we actually have several common platforms that we'll be talking about during the course of today's call. This platform, Zoom, WebEx, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, and others if you do, or if you have no remote meeting platform, that's something you can indicate as well on the poll. And then we also want to know a little bit about what is the hurdle that you run into most when you're doing this type of work. So is it the lack of proper equipment? Is it the technical staff skills to be able to do the work? Is it the training and preferences of the users that you're working with local electeds? Or if it's the software or other problems. So go ahead and use that poll here as we get into our meeting, and we'll find out a little bit more about it later on during the course of today's conversation. So let's begin with our panel. Let me introduce the panelists and we'll dive right in. Joining us on the panel today are Kathy Bisbee, the Executive Director of Brookline Interactive Group. BIG is a community media arts incubator that promotes creativity, self-expression through media literacy and art, storytelling, journalism, and virtual reality, and encourages community-based dialogue through hyper-local media content in Brookline, Massachusetts. Kathy is an award-winning filmmaker, community organizer, educator, and cultural producer, and is the co-founder and director of the Public VR Lab. She's joined by Ann Tice from BIG, who is managing educational programming for adults and youth at BIG, along with intern management, community outreach, and grant writing. Community-based media has been an intrinsic part of Ann's life since she attended Antioch College to become a documentary filmmaker. She spent notable stints at Manhattan Neighborhood Network and at Denver Open Media, where she won the Dirk Koenig George Stoney Award for Humanistic Communications from ACM just last year in 2019. Joining us also from BIG is IT Systems Administrator Andrew Doig. We'll also be talking with Adam McCune, who is the coordinator of Goffstown TV in Goffstown, New Hampshire. With a population of just 18,000 people, Goffstown is a community without a local newspaper, or radio station, or much else for local media, aside from it being overshadowed by New Hampshire's biggest city as its neighbor. With that, Goffstown TV has become a go-to for residents during the COVID-19 crisis. Only one small issue with that: Adam has been under direction to self-quarantine during the crisis. He was tested negative for COVID-19, but he continued with some symptoms and out of an abundance of caution has been home for the last 3 weeks. This has presented some challenges that are unique, and Adam will talk a bit about them as he has developed a decentralized way to conduct meetings for his community from his dining room table, where he joins us today, I believe. And we'll also be joined by Seth Ring, who is the Director of Education and Inclusion for Metro East Community Media in Gresham, Oregon. Seth is an Oregonian with a passion for nature and civic engagement, a field biologist turned filmmaker. He has joined community media because of its power to captivate hearts and minds. He spearheaded Metro East's digital inclusion program to provide training, technology, and internet connectivity to underserved groups in the East County of the Portland area. Welcome to you all, and thanks for joining us here on this webinar. Let's start things off first with Kathy Bisbee. Kathy, could you tell us a little bit about why you think remote meeting work is so important right now during the COVID crisis?
Sure. Thanks for having us, Mike. I'm going to go ahead and share my desktop here with you. See if we can, there we go, and present. Everybody see that okay? So I'm just going to talk, I know folks are doing amazing work out there. I've been talking to some of our colleagues and in the Boston and Massachusetts area and beyond. And I just want to thank you. I know we're all working really hard to try to meet our community's media and technology needs at a pretty difficult time. So I'm just going to talk for a few minutes here about some of the things that we've really prioritized early on. And I will say that over the last 3 weeks, not including this week, so the first 3 weeks of this crisis, we have been covering about 34 live meetings and about 36 different pieces of content. So it's been a busy 3 weeks, and I'm sure it has been for you as well. So I just want to talk about the opportunities here for community media, because I think it's really important that we very much proactively build and expand our relationships in the community. And I'm going to give you just a very quick example of that this morning. In fact, worked with the Chamber of Commerce for years, have a great relationship with them. They just didn't get all the things that we were doing for our community. So I've now set up a weekly call with them to go over what we're doing specifically and sharing information. We've done that with our town select board members. I'm now texting them. We're sharing memes and emojis. Things like this, actually, if you can see the nation close to getting web conferencing software to work has been a big funny hit. Sorry, I'm just trying to move this around here with folks that we work with. Sharing humor, sharing resources, sharing information, letting folks know what you've heard about what's working and what's not has been really important during this crisis. I think being able to see us as a expert and a hub for communications in our community and being really proactive about that is the #1 most important thing to build and expand your relationships. Secondly, to leverage resources and reinvent your organization's value proposition. This is an open-ended challenge that we're dealing with. We're going to talk a lot about technology during this call, and these are very specific technology solutions, but I want to talk to especially executive directors out there, folks that are looking at organizational change issues, boards. We need to think of this as an open-ended adaptive challenge that really is going to be about thinking about what are the problems that we can solve in our communities, and we don't even know the answer yet. We don't know what the problems even are yet. So don't think that you're going to be able to conquer everything all at once. Take things small and know that this is an open-ended challenge that we're dealing with, and we're figuring this out together. And we can be a tremendous resource and really leverage the resources that we have that will help us down the road to reinvent our organization's value proposition and reiterate the things that we've already been doing, but probably do things we've never done. We're already starting to see some of that in our community. Training and access to AV, IT, and supporting civic engagement. I know that's really obvious, but it's the ways that it's manifested in our community have been really amazing. We weekly have been doing a small business and nonprofit session with our town select board member. We get federal updates from our Congress member every week on that as well, and have done a session for community aid groups. We're doing another one with faith-based communities. We've got content that the community is giving us from religious communities, from Tabata teachers, from meditation experts. And we're even talking about how we can provide training like we have for the town electeds, and Ann's going to talk more about that, and provide that also for some of our community nonprofits and looking at how we can support arts and cultural organizations as well. And then most importantly, lastly, asking your community what they need. So they may not know yet, and they may not know what their problems are. They may not have any idea how to solve them. So I think one of the best things that you can do is call folks up and say, hey, what are you doing? Have open-ended conversations with people that you may not have normally. What are you doing? What are the problems that you think you have right now? What are some of the ideas that you have for solving them? Hey, we have some ideas as well, and see what you can build from that. And I think those conversations that we had that first week have really brought us lots of opportunities. And I will say the town on their own, without us even initiating this conversation, although we've added to it, has offered to put us into the town budget. And I think that really speaks to being very proactive and active on thinking about the ways that you can serve your community. We also upgraded our fiber during this time. We're upgrading our systems so that the systems Andrew and Ann are going to talk about today, we're going to even have better systems in the next week or so. But I think it's a really exciting time for community media, not just on the storytelling and the journalism and the community engagement side, but really thinking about what does the community need, asking them what they need, and then being a hub for that communication. So that's all I'm going to say. There's some website resources I just want to show you that we've put together and put together a number of these. Last night, you can go to brooklineinteractive.org/COVID-19. And you can see these are some of the list of resources that we've provided to the community, both technical documents, and we even created a nonprofit resource specific to COVID-19 that our community could use, and are updating that constantly, both on the channels and of course on the web and social media. So I'll leave it to the rest of the team. Like most EDs say, you know, I try to get out of the way and let the staff do the work. I really want to commend our team at BIG for not only their commitment over the last 3 weeks, but just going above and beyond. So thank you to Andrew and Ian and Corbin for all of their hard work. And for all of you out there, keep at it. I'm really excited that we're going to be able to share what we're learning, and we look forward to learning from you.
Thanks, Kathy. Before we talk about the platforms themselves, let's talk about the technical setups that it takes to be able to make things work. So Andrew, Adam, maybe you can talk a little bit about the technical setups that you've had to look at in your instance. And maybe we can start with you, Andrew, to talk a little bit about what that technical setup has meant at BIG.
Sure, let me just share my screen with you here. How's that look?
Are you okay?
You guys look good? Nope. Can you hear me?
Yep, it looks just fine, Andrew. Okay. So tell us a little bit more about the technical setup itself.
All right, so the setup that we're using 2 laptops because of some of the limitations in the software. But everyone, just want to preface that every setup is going to be different for every person. Every station is going to need a different way to do it. This is just a setup that works for us, and I'll run you through it. So we have, I have some pictures here. We have 2 laptops sitting next to each other in our studio control room. They're both on Google Remote Desktop, so we don't have to go to the office. Everything is remote. I've been running them a lot of the meetings from right here in my house. So what the laptops are doing, the one on the right, you can see here, that's laptop number 1, is running the meetings. So if it's a WebEx meeting, if it's a Zoom meeting, we get a link, an invite from the host of the meeting. Usually that's a town official. And we just join the meeting with microphone and camera turned off. We're using OBS, which is a free open source software. OBS stands for Open Broadcast Studio, I believe. And what we're doing with that is we make the meeting full screen, and then OBS captures the full screen of the laptop. And then we have I'm not sure you can see it in this photo here, but we're using an Elgato HD capture card. So the laptop outputs its video using OBS to what it thinks is a second monitor, but is actually a capture card. the capture card is feeding into the second laptop. And the second laptop is where we do all of our graphics, our audio leveling. We have a logo loop that we run between meetings so that, you know, it says coming up next. If a meeting doesn't start on time, you know, you can just run that for a while. And then coming out of that, using the same, you have to trick the laptop into thinking it has a second monitor, but you just output to, we're using a Blackmagic HyperDeck with an HDMI in, but you can really use whatever you have that can, you know, that we don't use that to record. We're just using it as an adapter that feeds into our cablecast system where it goes out to the town on, you know, on cable. And it also feeds into our live streaming encoder. Again, you can use whatever you want, just whatever you have. We're just using a Teradek. So what else I got for slides here? I have an equipment slide here. Yeah, so this is just a list of the stuff you're gonna need. It is possible to do it with one laptop if you are using WebEx. Zoom is a little more finicky with the window capture of OBS, which I can go over later if anyone needs a more detailed description of how that works. You need to use full screen for Zoom. It does on, at least on PCs. I haven't tested on Macs. I've heard it works, but again, that's not the setup we're using. Yeah, that's the setup we're using.
So Adam, maybe you could talk a little bit about your setup. Your setup is a little different because you're stuck in your house, but you're doing it with one laptop, right?
I'm doing it with one laptop, and I can say that it does work. The best trick I can say, though, is you absolutely want to have a second monitor if you can. And I don't know if Andrew, if you can stop sharing your screen.
Sorry, how do I this is embarrassing. How do you unshare your screen?
I think it's up at the top in the green bar there.
I don't have a green, wrong monitor. Okay.
There we go.
Sorry about that.
Adam, why don't you go ahead and share yours?
All right, let me find this. So, all right, so this is very similar to what you guys are doing there. This is basically what I had, because if you knew the background there, like Mike had mentioned, I was under quarantine. I think Mike even tweeted out my video on what I went through for the testing, which was pretty well received because I think a lot of people had a lot of questions on that. But I was basically in lockdown for almost 3 weeks here at home, and I didn't have a lot of access to our studio. We're a very small operation. I'm the only full-time employee. I do have some part-timers. One of them is my son. Another one is our studio tech, and our studio tech was able to go in, and we kind of set up a computer in order to make this all work so we could stream meetings and then pull the stream in to go out onto our channel. So yeah, we use OBS as well. I'm on a MacBook, and I will say OBS is not as user-friendly on a Mac. It's much easier to use on Windows. I kind of feel like the Mac version is almost like an older version of the Windows version, but it does still work, and there are other options. There's also Streamlabs OBS, which just came out for Mac. But this is just the basic OBS, the free version. Free, of course, because it's open source, and that's how it works. You can use layers in OBS if you're familiar with it. If you're not familiar with it, find a teenager who streams games, because they all use OBS. And basically, it just works like Photoshop layers. So the top layer is the top one that you would see, and you can kind of peel those off as you go on. So the way we did it is I took everything I needed to put like a Zoom meeting or WebEx, we've used both of those, onto our second monitor that I have sitting here at my dining room table. And then I kind of run everything else with the main screen on my monitor, and then it streams out to Restream. We use that service because Restream will actually put it out to several different instances at once, like our Facebook and our YouTube pages. We actually stream it to 3 places at once. With that, we would go into vMix, which I can operate remotely from my laptop here, which is sitting at our studio. So here's our second location, essentially, where we have vMix and a TriCaster sitting next to each other. and the vMix output is taken as an input on the TriCaster. The reason I had to do that is we have our TriCaster hardwired into our rack. So we need to kind of virtually be able to put that out there. And then it goes into our routing switch, which goes out to Cablecast, which goes out to channel 22. So you can kind of see this is OBS on my end. This is what it looks like. And there's that little kind of gradient area is where Zoom, or for that matter, WebEx would be. Our town actually put out an edict that no town devices are supposed to have Zoom. So I guess in that sense, I'm doing this nefariously because I have Zoom, but they did give me a bit of a pass because one thing that I can't do is I can't do school board meetings because that's what they kind of decided to go with. So I'm kind of stuck with that. I have to use Zoom, but it's a very basic setup, and I wanted to be able to run our meetings from this spot, and I think it kind of works pretty well. I'll even say this, I'll go so far as to say that there are some things on my end, at least, that are objectively better, I think. You get one camera for each person, you get their name at the bottom. I mean, in that sense, if we have an agenda on the side, which we didn't normally. So this is kind of presenting an opportunity to me to kind of rethink how we're doing our meetings, because maybe there's some things that could be better as we go forward.
So Adam, before we go on to talk about the platforms themselves, Nathan's got a couple of questions that specifically relate to some of these issues that you're dealing with, because you're not in the studio. You're basically finding a way to get into the studio, providing a feed into your studio to be able then to have it shot back out through the cable casting system. So he asked a question about port forwarding in terms of the setup. And I don't know, Andrew, if you could talk about this too. Have you had any problems with port forwarding in setting up the workflow?
I'm going to look to see if I can find any of that on there. I didn't have any issues. We did have, there's like this weird issue that we have with vMix and TriCaster and NDI. If we turn on the vMix machine first, it won't work. I don't know what that's all about, but we have to turn on our TriCaster first and then pull in the vMix. It could be backwards from that, but we basically have them both sitting there and going. But I didn't have to do any port forwarding or anything like that. NDI is pretty much agnostic. It just kind of works. So as long as you have it set up right, it's okay. And
then one last question from Edward before we turn to Seth to talk a little bit more about platforms. From Edward, you leave your TriCaster on all the time?
I wouldn't typically, but yes.
In this instance?
In this instance, for me personally, we have to fill out 2 forms and be approved to go into our high school because our high school is completely locked down. I think the assumption is they had a positive case somewhere in the school. So,
yeah. So given the circumstances, it's necessary. Okay. Fair enough. Well, again, if you've got questions as we're going along with the course of the discussion, go ahead and share them with us, and we'll try to get to them as we're going, and we'll have time at the end for Q&A as well. Let's talk a little bit about the platforms here, and Seth, maybe I can turn this over to you. You're not using Zoom primarily with your meeting work. You're using Google.
Yeah, we use something called Google Hangouts Meet. It's an industrial version of Google Hangouts, which I think a lot of people might be familiar with. So I was going to talk a little bit about, compare that to Zoom, and then Ann was going to jump in and talk a little bit about WebEx. I can't do like a full tour, but I'm going to just do a screen share here and talk a little bit about Google Hangouts Meet, and then I'll compare to Zoom a little bit. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, hoping you guys can see that all right. And I'm going to move some of this malarkey out of the way. So Google Hangouts Meet is really helpful. We have, if you have G Suite, and it's often, if you're a nonprofit, you can get an enterprise version of it. And then lots of schools use Google Classroom, and so they're in the G Suite already. Google Hangouts Meet is a very good option for meetings. I think that we did a teleconferencing for government, education, and nonprofit employees a couple of weeks ago, and many of our educators are using Google Hangouts Meet, and even some government employees. So I think one of the things we need to think about is we're not just teaching somebody to produce content for something. It could just be how do we use this teleconferencing software. I'm going to do a quick tour of the interface. So I am on a Google Hangouts Meet window. I'm going to just jump into a meeting I already have set up. Nobody is here, but I'm going to join now. It's a very simple interface. It's stripped down compared to Zoom. And I think if you're used to using the Google Verse stuff, it's very accessible. You can add attachments via calendar invites, dial in all of your audio settings here, and obviously hang up, turn off your camera. And then there's just this simple settings right here that we can go into and adjust our audio, have different inputs for our microphones and video setup. You can record with Google Hangouts Meet, but I will just say I think Zoom is a better recording software. It does a higher quality. You can actually do like a on your hard drive recording. And if you are going to use it, we did a producing from home workshop where we recommended that you use Zoom to do that, just because it's easier to use. It's free if it's a one-to-one meeting. So if you're trying to do a talk show or something like that, we've already started to use it for a community hotline talk show. So it's more robust if you're trying to produce something. One thing about Google Hangouts Meet is it's similar to Zoom, that you can have giant webinars like live stream, and then you can have up to 250 people participating in a meeting. And it's catching up to Zoom, but it's not as industrial strength as Zoom. So I would say if you're thinking about how you can be helping people right now, I think there's a lot of people that are using this platform or don't know how to use it. And if you want to create a class to help people out, this is something that we've been pretty successful at so far. We've had good attendance for our teleconferencing classes. And then I would say for Zoom, again, it's better if you want to produce a show for it. And I would just hands down recommend that. I would say it's, I've heard it be compared, like Google Hangouts Meet is sort of like Final Cut, the new Final Cut. And Zoom is more like Adobe Premiere. So you can dial things in a lot more. But there's also that learning hurdle that comes with it. I'm not going to go over the Zoom interface because through a quirk, we're all using it. And the other thing is through a quirk in it, you can't actually see the interface if I do a screen share of the Zoom software. So if you are going to teach people how to use Zoom, what we've been doing is we did a Google Hangouts Meet where we sent everybody the invite. And then we had people jump into a Zoom meeting afterwards. Obviously, I think a big thing that's been an issue is talking about Zoom bombing. So the way to prevent that from happening is you need to password protect your meetings. And they actually have a setup so that you can, if you send them a link, the password is sort of like rolled into their link. And that's a way that if you see that as a hurdle for people, which it is, I mean, this is new software to a lot of people. So if you're trying to kind of cut down barriers that are a technological challenge, getting rid of that password in the sense of if I just send you a link, that password is rolled in, is super helpful. Anne, do you mind talking about WebEx?
Sure. I mean, honestly, we've kind of used both of them, and we use Zoom for a lot of our personal things and for some of the side meetings that we do. But for all of the Brookline town meetings, they officially use WebEx. And I think that that's really the major difference is between WebEx is more of a large business, large enterprise sort of tool. A lot of bigger systems that have, huge IT departments that have a lot of Cisco products want to use WebEx because it integrates very well with their systems. So you might not really, most of you won't, we didn't really have much of a choice. We just had to go with what they wanted to use and learn to work with it. I can share my screen here for a second. I just have this page up. Let's see. So this just kind of goes through and shows sort of a comparison, and you can easily Google this information, but you can see between Zoom and WebEx, they're very close. There's a couple differences. One is that you can do on-demand webinars with Zoom that you can't do with WebEx. You have to actually buy into that platform level. And then just a couple other minor differences, like the way they track their registrations and things like that, but and analytics. But there's not a lot of differences in that way. Andrew, did you want to say anything about the difference in terms of technical stuff? I mean, definitely the issue that Zoom, you can't do or easily do the window capture, but can do the window capture with WebEx. So that actually makes it easier when we're doing all of our Brookline town meetings.
Yeah, from a technical side, on my end, that's really the only difference between them. On both of them, I get emailed a link, I click the link, I join the meeting, I turn off my camera, I make it full screen, and I close that instance of Google Remote Desktop, because that's what we're using to remotely control those laptops. And then I move to the second laptop, I remote into that one, and it's getting fed the video. Whether it's WebEx or Zoom, it doesn't make a difference to us.
Can I add one thing, Ian?
Mm-hmm.
I think just so that folks who haven't maybe used Zoom, using the Zoom webinars is an add-on to your account. I think that's just important to remind people. So you do have to pay extra for that. But our recommendation is if you're going to use Zoom, it's actually worth it to get the webinar tool, because you can enable the speakers that you want to be allowed to speak. You make them panelists. And then, you know, Mike, in this case, if he wanted to promote one of you attendees to the role of panelist so that you could speak, he has control over that. If you just set up a regular Zoom call and you have it set to keep people unmuted, it won't prevent them from unmuting themselves. So you do need to set it up as a webinar, because we have seen people Zoom bombed even in the last week, where people were able to do things like share the screen and put up pornography. So you have to make sure that that setting is off in your settings as the host. You need to make sure that you only have certain people who are allowed to speak. And the best way to do that is with webinar, just to be clear.
Well, and even there's also a layer of security over controlling what people can and can't share as they participate. So as the administrator of this call, I can turn off or on the level of sort of sharing access or presentation access that people have. And you'll notice we're getting questions on both the Q&A area. So you could conceivably be using the Q&A area specifically to get public comment and questions on individual items, for example, in an agenda. Again, it's this question of the level of control that you have. And I think the expectation of anonymity is something that I think is very, very common on the internet, but you don't have any expectation if you're in a public meeting in City Hall to have a bag on your head and then start spewing stuff in public anonymously. There's like zero expectation of anonymity in public. So it's something about having us train our norms and expectations to ensure that we're getting what we want to get out of the active working together is extremely important. It's not just a technological fix. It's really sort of how we use technology to work together and work together in a civilized manner. So that's extremely important. And I think most of these tools give you some ability to do that. You just have to kind of pick and choose what fits within your culture, or even sort of the workplace habits that folks have. Before we kind of move into some training aspects of this, I want to kind of ask the group a question that came from Town Square in Minnesota. You know, they're an intermediary for a bunch of different government organizations. All those government organizations have their own preferences. They want WebEx, they want Google Hangouts, maybe they want Microsoft Teams. Is that a bridge too far for an organization? How do you handle having to basically go between the different platforms? Do you have to become conversant in every platform that everybody wants, or do you have to be working as a partner with those institutions to help them make better choices? I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on that.
Anne, do you want to answer that? Anne's been doing some really specific work to sort of address that at our organization.
Yeah, I mean, we were in the beginning, we were really trying to, after our first meeting, using WebEx, because we had, as a staff, only really been using Zoom. We're trying to kind of gently force the city to change to Zoom. And a lot of actually like residents of Brookline were chatting on like YouTube and different, and Facebook, use Zoom, use Zoom, use Zoom. And the city just held firm and they're like, we're gonna work through this. And so what we ended up doing is, yeah, we had to become conversant in WebEx, and we created a bunch of documents so that we both knew how to use it, and then we could go ahead and train other people to use it better. So I would say yes. I mean, if you're lucky, you can convince the right person to go to the platform that you like the best, but that's not going to always be the case. They might have a lot of investment in that. And so you're going to have to, learn each platform that you're required to use, and just do the best to train everybody that you can.
Well, could you guys talk a little bit about that training that's necessary though too? Because I think there's an expectation that you just turn the camera on and it's all magic. And, I mean, I think there's a lot of sort of expectations that perhaps even elected officials have sometimes about, the techs all make things work behind the scenes. What's the type of training that you have to do to be able to work with users or elected officials to be able to get the best experience possible? It's actually the number one concern I think that our participants have in the poll is user experience and user training. What do you have to do?
Okay. All right. Yeah. So let me, I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. All right. So yeah, I mean, I think so we started, I know a lot of people kind of that we've talked to sort of waited to start doing some of these meetings for like a week or two to kind of figure out what they wanted to do. We actually just jumped right in. They basically closed the schools down, and we're located in the Brookline High School. And so they closed the school down on March 13th. And that very next Tuesday, we were doing like a virtual town hall. So it was total trial by fire. And so, we had the technical setup, and that first week we ended up making a lot of tweaks to the technical setup to make it better. And so we got our stuff together, all of our technical stuff together. But that was really only half the battle. So the very next week, our technical operations were running really well, but we were still having tons of problems. And I realized that, I mean, you're talking about anywhere from 7 to 15 people in one of these meetings, and each person's internet connections, each person's camera, each person's device, all their headphones or not headphones, all of these things contribute to problems or not having problems. And so what I did was I talked to the town liaison and asked her to set up meetings with everybody on the select board. And I created a spreadsheet. Actually, so I'm jumping ahead here. I'm forgetting to go through my slides. So we did the one-on-ones with the key people. And through that list, I created a list of equipment discovery so that we would meet with each person and learn what they had equipment in their home setup, what kind of software that we were using, and then teach them that. So if it was Zoom or WebEx, and then if we were training someone who was a host or a moderator. So just to give you an idea here, this is a before and after pictures of a couple of our select board members. So this was without training. You see the sort of like weird shots or like the big ceiling shots, bad lighting, no headphones at all. And then afterwards, you can see the camera is much more eye level and good proper lighting for each person, and headphones. And actually, Nancy, the person on the bottom, she actually got her headphones that we ordered for her last week. So she sounded much better even this past week. So all these little things made a huge difference. And just to give you an idea, these are some of the things that I went through. And these meetings, depending on the person's technical abilities, lasted anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour and a half. We just went through everything. You're using an iPad, a laptop, a tablet. What kind of connections do you have? Where is your internet? Do you know what a modem is? Do you know where your router is? Can you do Ethernet? We actually gave them a link to do a speed test. And a lot of people actually thought that they had a lot more bandwidth than they had. The gentleman that was on this back picture, Bernard, he thought he was paying for gig internet, and he was getting a download speed of 0.4. or no, upload speed. His download was like 3. So it was almost impossible to do video. So he had to call Comcast and find out what's going on. So all of these little things for each person help. And then you go through the software, how to join the meeting, how to mute, unmute, how to turn your camera on and off, how to make adjustments to the camera. What if I tell them during the meeting to tilt up or pan left or right, so that they're more centered? Do they know what that means? Lighting in the room. What kind of situation? Some of them were sitting right in front of a window and the window was behind them instead of in front of them. So it was really hard to see their face. Their face kept getting really dark. Do they know how to share their screen? Do they understand where the participant list? And this is a very important one because somebody on that meeting, in a government meeting, has to do roll call. So it's very critical that they understand how to use the participant list, how to send chats, and then of course, how to plug in headphones and test their audio to whatever device they're using. Because we were getting a lot of that first couple of weeks, we were getting really bad feedback, and it would because they didn't know how to mute, and then they would also have issues with not having their headphones, and it was really getting unbearable.
And one way that I wonder that could be a help is using a raise hand function to be able to be recognized and then unmute within a host capacity. That would be a way to be having someone acting as a traffic cop and perhaps even a timekeeper within that meeting situation. Does that sound appropriate? Because I think at least Zoom has that capability, but yes.
That we did try to get them to use that at first. The problem is, and when it's just a general select board meeting, there's only like 7 of them, and they all want to be able to talk. And so they're not going to wait for the person to like see their hand raising and then unmute them. In a situation where it's more of a town hall, where there's like other people besides just a select board, then yes, they are starting to use that. And actually, yesterday's select board meeting was the first time that they tried WebEx events. So that's the equivalent of what we're doing right now. So they were promoting people who were part of the, who had wanted to publicly speak. They would just come in as a regular attendee, and then when it was the appropriate time to speak, they would promote them to panelists and then go back again. And so they could raise their hand if they wanted to speak, and then they would also be promoted at that appropriate time.
And in a similar fashion, if your government meeting had a 2-minute time limit for public comment on an agenda item, you sign up to comment on the specific agenda item, you could be brought in, but you need to have someone actually keeping time as a host of the meeting to be able to promote and move someone around. It's a specific role that someone has to have to be able to make sure that you can use the technology appropriately together.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, is that like, I think there needs to be someone in the meeting that is both like somebody running the webinar and then someone also paying attention to like what's happening in the meeting. So on the town side, and then on our side, we also have a 2-person setup. So we have either Andrew or Corbin doing the technical, the remoting into our system and managing all the technical parts of the meeting. And then Kathy or I are just monitoring the meeting, making sure that people are adhering to, not sinking down into the bottom of the frame, or that you can hear them, put your headphones on, things like that. So yeah, it's a lot of teamwork and a lot of coordination. And I would definitely say that the webinar and the WebEx events are much better for those kinds of things than just a general open Zoom meeting.
Kathy, you wanted to add something really quickly.
I just want to add something really quick, just because it's kind of an awesome story. What we saw early on when we were struggling through some of this knowledge and training folks is that we really became the co-moderators with the town staff and the school committee staff. And we've now transitioned successfully to not really having to do that for them anymore. But I think that point that Anne made is really important and could also be an awesome role for you to be in the early days of them rolling that out, because they're so appreciative of that. And it's something that's easy for you. So why not just offer that? We also had the town librarians helping to moderate public comment during one of those first meetings and hand it off to the town administrator and the town staff, and we were helping with that too, over both cable channels, of course, and then over live on YouTube streaming and on Facebook, and also created a watch party on Facebook, which somehow finds people differently than you might on just YouTube streaming or on Zoom, because people are also watching those channels as well. I just wanted to throw that in real quick.
And one other question that comes up from Marcia is how you communicate to the selectmen during the meeting. Do you actually give them cues and directorial advice? Adam, are you doing that right now?
Well, I would actually say that at this point, I don't do it during the meeting. It's kind of like one of those things. I have a radio background, and you don't bother the host while they're on air. You want to tell them afterwards that they messed up, maybe, especially selectmen, which are essentially my bosses. We kind of do a best practices after each one. And what I find is good about this is everybody's extremely forgiving about minor mistakes. Nobody is going to be like, well, you know, so-and-so didn't have this right. And they had we actually had our Parks and Rec director. He called in for his audio, and then he had a tablet for his video, which is a huge no-no, because when he spoke, it wouldn't go to his video because it was two separate sources. And I don't know why he couldn't figure that out, except that I know our Parks and Rec director, so it makes a lot of sense to me. But so I find that everybody's pretty forgiving about it, and we're trying to kind of adjust as we go along, and it seems to be okay from their standpoint anyway.
I mean, and certainly during the course of an emergency situation, I think people want to ensure that things happen as opposed to getting down in the weeds on those details, which can be ironed out as we go. And you're
and one of the things what we did for that was we try to, well, not that everyone follows it, but we try to get them to, we open up the meeting a half an hour beforehand and try to get them to sign up, like jump on so we can do an audio test and, you know, just to check their camera or like their lighting situation. And like, usually I would just text the person who's the town liaison if there's a problem. But now since I've done the training and I know the select board members, it's not, they're not going to think it's weird because I was their teacher for me to chat with them. So as long as they're not in the middle of talking, I do send them a private chat in WebEx and just tell them, hey, can you tilt your camera down a little bit? Or can you make this a little bit of adjustment? And is usually, as long as they're not talking, and if they have the wherewithal to actually look at the chat, then it's helpful.
I would also suggest having cell phone numbers, honestly, Mike.
Yeah, as a backup for connection in case there's a problem.
Have a cell phone for every single person you're working with right now.
Right.
We're all
That's exactly right.
cell phones for work.
Yeah, that's what we end up trying to do. And then the other thing I would just sort of mention is a good standard practice is that you make sure you have a waiting room before you begin the broadcast, and that everybody's comfortable in the waiting room before the broadcast begins, so that there's no problems with mics, there's no problems with connections, there's no misunderstandings along the way, and everyone's comfortable to be able to conduct their work together. That's another sort of standard best practice. I'm looking at time a little bit here. I know we wanted to talk a little bit about other community applications that meeting technology can have for our work in PEG. But Anne, did you want to just kind of wrap this up a little bit in terms of the work?
Yeah, I think, and we've been trying to document all of this stuff, and you can go, Kathy mentioned this already, at brooklineinteractive.org/COVID-19, where we put all of these different things here. But I just want to wrap up by saying, that to really use this opportunity, I mean, almost every single meeting now, one of the select board members or one of the school committee members cannot thank Big enough for what we've done to help get out the word during this time and help make this all possible. It is incredible the amount of goodwill that this has created within our community for us, just being this technical expert and taking the time to do individual trainings with people.
Let me relay one other question that's come up in the Q&A before we start talking about community applications a little bit here. This comes from Scott. I'm not sure what community Scott's in, but he talks about not allowing the public to participate in the Zoom meeting because dozens of people are involved and they couldn't figure out a fair way to call on people. In the live meeting, they just line up at the podium. Also, they didn't want to discriminate against people who don't have the ability to log into Zoom. They watch the meeting on the cable channel, no computer needed. What kind of reaction do folks have to that?
I mean, my reaction, I've talked a lot with town officials and elected specifically about how to make public comment more equitable. We have a really, a lot of people in our community talking about diversity and inclusion right now. And it's something we as an organization are really focused on as well. So, I mean, folks can call in by phone with all of these tools. So and they can also send an email in advance. So we've had a number of different ways that different organizations and government agencies have invited the public to give public comment. If they don't have Zoom, if they didn't have a phone, that might be a challenge. But you know, there's also on YouTube live streaming, we open it up for live chat and we monitor that for questions and comments by the public. And we've trained our government staff and our school committee staff now to also monitor that and to bring it back into the meeting and have someone designated to do that in advance. I will add, in addition to that half an hour before.
Kathy, I'm just being mindful mindful of time here. So make it very, very quick.
Dress rehearsals, Mike, that's all.
Yeah. So the only other thing I'd say to your point, before we talk about community applications that PEG channels should be thinking about with meeting technology, is that in all of this, you have to publicize how people participate in the first place. There's nothing that's intuitive that says that, you know, there's one way or another way. And it means that I think it's incumbent upon us as organizers and the public officials, certainly it's incumbent upon them to find out how people can participate, particularly in a time of crisis or a time of emergency. Not to sort of think that everyone has one mode. It actually emphasizes the idea that we need to be considering what modes of communication people can use, especially when we're in a time when being in presence of each other can be extremely hazardous, not just our health, but to public health generally. So that's just something to think about as we're doing this work and doing the outreach ahead of time before the meeting takes place to ensure that you get best communication and best participation possible. We've got about 10 minutes left in the discussion today, and I know you guys want to talk a little bit about other applications that are possible for community benefit. Some of the things that we've been seeing from stations across the country is they've been using remote meeting technologies and trying to incorporate it into their workflows, incorporate it into their production practices as we're in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. What kind of examples are you guys coming up with or you're seeing of using that remote meeting technology? Adam, why don't you go ahead?
We did something a little bit kind of, I wouldn't say frivolous, because it was definitely well received, where we're very heavy with sports. We do a lot of high school sports productions, and we were right at the end of the girls' basketball season. And as it turned out, they were not able to finish the girls' basketball season. So what we did is we actually simulated the finals for the girls' basketball team. And we ended up, this is a highlight if you're seeing this right now. This was, my son pulled this together. It took about 5 hours effort to get all of the rosters in there. And you can see we actually had the shortest girl on the team dunk it there during the game. But he used custom rosters, made a custom stadium, and put this all together in NBA 2K, which I thought was really kind of cool. And it was really well received in our community. And for some reason now I can't unshare my screen. But that was certainly well received and something that you know, really appreciated. We actually set it up so that we would win, and we didn't. So was the downside. Though I will say this, the other team, which is BG, they had won 4 in a row, and there was no way they were going to lose to us anyway. So we had a lot of people from Nashua watching, and so they kind of chimed in and appreciated it as well. So all good.
Fantastic, Adam. And Seth, other examples?
Yeah, we started something called the Co-Video contest, And it was, we've had a class that we kind of dusted it off called Film with Your Phone. And it's basically based on the concept that the best camera is the one that's in your hand. And that's what most people have right now. So we did a co-video contest. And then we also, we did a producing from home workshop that was sort of a mashup between our teleconferencing workshop and our Film with Your Phone workshop. So it's been a good, I actually think that in sort of, if you go back to the roots of community media about people telling their stories, it's been a really good opportunity to get real, like, emotional content from our producers. And sometimes we drew in people that hadn't even done anything at Metro East before. It's been a good opportunity to really get some raw emotional content from people. One thing I would add, I'm going to put another plug in for why we are advocating for Zoom, people to use it as a platform, is the ability to share your screen sound. That's one of the things that I've been telling people is, well, if you can basically run it, if you want to do a talk show, you can run it as if it's a talk show and have two faces or just the speaker talking. But also, let's say you want to do some roll-in, you can actually pull up the video and it will share that screen sound. So we've been trying and think, and I think for the future, even when we open up, like, we've had great attendance at our events, better attendance than when we have live events. And I think part of it's just because people don't have as much to do, but it's also, it's an inclusion issue. Like, it's a long ways to drive to where we are. And if we can do it as an online workshop, it's more accessible.
Seth, Dave Ortega asks, who's the targets for the workshops? Is it specific groups or just the general public? Were you looking for certain nonprofits or certain neighborhoods? Who give us a little bit more sense of that?
What we did, we did a teleconferencing workshop that was specifically aimed at government, nonprofit, and education employees. But then for our producing from home class and our co-video class, it was supposed to be something to re-engage our existing producers so they don't fall off. And then also it was meant to be for anybody that wanted to participate. And we've gotten, I mean, for our co-video contest, we had a dude from France send us a video, and I think it's opened up new avenues. We have people that, we've had people from nonprofits that have come in that probably wouldn't have produced something before. So it's sort of like this new avenue that we can explore. And I look forward to weaving that back into our programming when we open back up to the public.
Anne?
Yeah, I think we're doing, one of the things we did that we didn't have before is that we actually created a Google, a Dropbox so that people could submit content remotely. I think that's a really important thing that every single public access station should be doing. Or you could also do a Google Drive. And then that way people can create stuff in Zoom and then immediately drop it off. So we have different people, like we have this woman, Isan, who's running for Congress, and she's been doing weekly shows and dropping them off for us to air. And we have like as Kathy mentioned, a Tabata class. So exercise, we have a meditation class that's been sending it in so we can put it on our channels. And we're working also on curriculum, as much like Seth is, to provide different resources to people to teach them how to use things like Zoom to create content, how to use their smartphones, and simple free editing software that you can get online. And also a digital storytelling class that Kathy's working on. Kathy, do you want to say anything else?
Well, actually, we're just about out of time, Anne.
Oh,
so
okay.
I just want to say I guess the way to put this is we're just really scratching the surface with applications that we could be doing with these technologies and these applications. And really, it's a question of how we use our resources and our imagination to meet our community needs in a time like this. So I think there's lots of possibilities, and I want to thank you all for all the work that you've been doing, and thank all of our participants who joined us today to be part of the discussion. Thank you for the work that you're doing day to day during the course of the COVID crisis. Just about out of time, but let me thank you all individually here. Kathy Bisbee, Andrew Doig and Tice, thank you so much for joining us from Brookline Interactive Group. Seth Ring, thank you for holding down the fort from Metro East in Gresham, Oregon. And Adam McCune in Goffstown, New Hampshire, thank you for joining us from your living room. Great to be with you here during the course of today's conversation. And just a quick reminder here of a couple things. One, we have recorded today's presentation. This will be available to you on the ACM website after today's presentation. And then we want to remind you of our next webinar that will be taking place. That will be taking place next week. It's another one of our free webinars that ACM is providing. On April 15th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll be talking about the ways that PEG channels are helping communities during the COVID-19 crisis. So not just the things that Adam and Seth and Ann and Kathy and Andrew have been talking about, but other ways that people have been stepping up. So please join us for that presentation and let other people know about it. Again, that's free, but we ask you to register at www.allcommunitymedia.org so we can be in contact with you. Look under events on the website tab. Thanks again for joining us here on this ACM webinar. I hope you have a great Wednesday. Take care, everybody.